Founded in 1987. Formerly known as Latin Angels, 1987 to 1993. Affiliations People Nation, 1995, 2000 or later. People Nation, 1995, 2000 or later. Colors white and royal blue. Primary ethnicities Latino Mexican. Symbols angel and halo. Symbol usage halo with 5 slashes above it. Status active. The Latin Angels are a suburban-made street gang that came up in one of the hardest suburbs in Chicagoland, Cicero, Illinois. A small partying crew of lowrider fanatics got together to hang out, and called their crew the Latin Angels in the year 1987. The crew was put together by Sal and Alberto at 13th and 48th, and by Attracta Church at 18th and 48th. For 4 or 5 years the Latin Angels continued on as a party crew that avoided the normal gang violence and pressures to join a gang. This was easier to do in the late 80s and very early 90s, because the only major gangs in Cicero at the time were Latin Kings, 2-2 Boys, 2-6, 12th Street Players and Park Boys. The Latin Angels could not help but to get along with the 2-2 boys in the neighborhood that showed the Angels respect. It was not until 1993, when several new Chicago-based gangs moved into Cicero, causing very heavy tensions on the streets. Everything would get turned upside down, and the Latin Angels' existence as they knew it would permanently change on July 20, 1993, on a hot afternoon out in front of the Parkholme Pool, at 1-820 West 51st Court, 18th Street, and 51st Court. At about 4 p.m., the Latin Angels were hanging outside the pool when a carload of Latin Kings in a red Cavalier pulled up to converse with the Latin Angels, because the Latin Angels were cool with the Latin Kings as well. One of the Kings talking to the Angels used to be a 2-2 boy from Cicero that moved to the suburb of Summit and flipped to be a Latin King in Summit. In the middle of conversation, a 2-2 boy came up throwing gang signs and throwing down the crown, disrespecting the Latin King hand sign, and shouting offensive things about Latin Kings. The Latin Kings shouted things back then pulled away. At that point the Latin Kings thought the Latin Angels had joined the folk nation, so they were instantly marked by these Kings. The Latin Kings then circled around the pool several times in the red Cavalier, until they got reinforcements with 2 other cars that pulled up and opened fire out of their back seats. In all, 5 youths were mowed down by the gunfire, and 4 out of 5 of them survived the shooting. No 2-2 boys were shot in the drive-by shooting, which was the intended target. A 12-year-old boy was grazed while using the diving board, a 14-year-old girl was shot in the leg. A 15-year-old boy was shot in the arm and leg, a 21-year-old man was shot in the stomach, but worst off was 15-year-old Edward Lalo Jaquez that was shot in the chest and died. Jaquez was the first Latin Angel to be killed on the streets, and it was at the hands of the Latin Kings. After July 20, 1993, the Latin Angels now became a gang-banging crew that now gang-banged on the Latin Kings as their arch-enemy. However, this would not last long because the 2-6s were in the area in very heavy numbers and began disrespecting the Latin Angels, and this started a war with the 2-6s as well. The war escalated fast to the point where they were shooting at each other, but 2-6 was much stronger in numbers, and the Latin Angels had no allies to assist them because the 2-2 boys left the area and did not back them up. The Latin Angels then withdrew from the area as well. At this point the Latin Angels were still in heavy mourning over Lalo's death, but now they had other issues to weigh in on. First, there was the bigger issue with 2-6. Another issue is the 2-2 boys abandoned them, and when the LAs really looked back on that day Lalo got killed, they came to the realization that the 2-2 boys started that drama with the Latin Kings that day, and dragged them into their war with the Kings. One of the Latin Angels was also incarcerated for stealing a car, and Latin Kings offered him protection in prison. The Latin Angels took in all these factors, especially the prison factor, and decided to forgive the Latin Kings. And the Latin Kings took the LAs under their wing, and brought them into the People Nation in the same year of 1993. The Latin Angels showed their allegiance to the Latin Kings by becoming Almighty Latin Angels, and from there on the Angels went to war with maniac Latin disciples 2-6 and La Raza in the neighborhood, as they set up turf at Roosevelt Road to 14th Street and 50th Avenue to Laramie. Please send in old school pics. If you have any late 1980s or very early 1990s Angels pics, please send them in. Questions. 1. Who was the founder? 2. What was the original set in Parkholme? 3. Who were all the leaders in the 1990s and what years? Known sections of the Latin Angels past and present suburbs. Carpentersville, Seville, 24th and Gulfview. Cicero Roosevelt to 14th 50th Avenue to Laramie, Parkholme area.